Hello and welcome to my video. In this video I finally am showing the progress getting the motor off of the 85. I did a little bit of preemptive removal on the frame. I'm trying to get some things off here in order to get this bad boy painted. So I took the motor off. And it's easy to see the serial plate now. Kind of cool. And yeah, the frame looks great. I don't see any real problems, just a tiny bit of rust, but it's just surface rust where the paint chipped. And just some grease around, you know, where the motor was. But everything looks good. So next up, I'm going to remove the solenoid here, and that should get the rest of these wires out. I think this is the only two here that I'm going to leave. Otherwise, this is going to be pretty much stripped at this point, and then it'll be ready for some paint. In the meantime, in a previous video I showed that I had messed up painting the replacement airbox, and I finally threw another almost dropped it. Threw another coat on here and it looks pretty good. And I just did a much lighter coat and it looks like it took alright. And it's pretty glossy, so it looks more bumpy than it is, but it's actually pretty smooth. It just is kind of the texture of the paint. And yeah, she's pretty. So that's this air box, which is now IH white. Next up to paint is this shroud here. This is the transmission chain guard that goes on the frame. This guy normally goes right here. This normally goes right here and guards the chain going down from the transmission. And that needs to be painted. I took the gas tank pieces off because this is the wrong white. And these should be this color, which is the correct IH, not the white that it is. So these are going to get repainted. And I have the gas tank, which actually looks like it was an original that the guy painted. And that kind of bums me out because these original tanks are actually pretty hard to find. And the replacement tank that I had to get is one of these black ones, which then if you paint looks like crap. So I kind of left it black, which is one of the few pieces that is not correct, but looks like this guy painted one that was good. That's kind of sad. Anyway, it still had some fuel in there, so I'm leaving this here in case anything decides to drain. And I finally did some more grinding and finished up this here, which is the output shaft I was working on. And I just used a Dremel and cut a little bit for a keyway, and I'm actually not going to use that as a true keyway, but in general it's not perfect, but it works enough that I think this is going to power a mower. And you have to remember that a chain's going on here, and depending on the type of sprocket I get, it could have a bit of lateral play anyway due to the bearing that usually is on them. So in this case, I might not use a sprocket with a bearing, but it might help to figure out how much play there is. But in this case, I don't think it's that bad. So this will probably get reassembled, or it will become a Frankenstein transmission for another idea I had, which I'll share in another video. But I actually had the concept of maybe using two of these transmissions together. And if that was the case, the easiest way to do it would be to not run a sprocket here and instead weld this directly to the input of a different one that maybe is sitting right next to it. And if you look on the frame, if we go back over here, if the transmission goes right here, and that is before the median line of the chassis, then basically another transmission could go here. And the only thing that's really in the way is this solenoid, which really, if I were to put this back together, if I wasn't worried about being stock, I would probably take this solenoid and put it in here, and then use one of the smaller garden tractor batteries, which back in the day, batteries were a bit bigger because they weren't as good. And most of these, like my 85 just has a, or my 75, has a small garden tractor battery in there, which kind of bounces around anyway. I don't even have it secured that well, but it's not like this thing hits any high G-forces. So, I don't know. I'm thinking about an idea of maybe Frankensteining another transmission here, having a shift lever come out this side, and having the ability to basically multiply one transmission through another. And depending on which transmissions I used, I would gain quite a bit of gears, either on the low or on the high side. But I'm thinking about building one of these for 4x4, just kind of for fun, and putting a major lift on it, some huge ag tires. I was even thinking about putting another axle behind one of these and making a 6x6 or something like that, but I don't know. I don't want to go too crazy on this video. I was just trying to share the stripped frame. So I'm almost done stripping this down. Next up will probably be getting the steering wheel and column off, and then pulling off the front axle, which I believe is pretty simple. I just have to pull that bolt and undo one arm of the linkage, and this whole thing should drop off as a unit. And that's probably easier to then dismantle up on a bench. And I don't know if I'm going to take these off or not, the mower deck arms. They really would come off pretty simple by just removing them here or going underneath the frame, but honestly I could probably just paint with all of this here. No one really sees these, and any amount of paint I put on them would probably be better than where they're at now. But I probably will go through and clean up some of the rust here, and depending on what I'm doing, and maybe I'm just crazy, I was thinking about enforcing some of these welds. Reinforcing, I mean, these welds that are factory are kind of chintzy if this is to ever take any real weight. They're not really welded all the way through, so I would just go across here, and then I noticed up at the front suspension, there is just a tiny little bitty tack that holds that weld on, and it's really not very strong. So I would probably go across here as well, so if this thing hits any major bumps, it ain't going to damage the front suspension. And other than that, I also had some ideas about maybe getting a spring in between here or some kind of shock, and then cutting the axle right at the center point and having two bolts, and these are basically then being control arms. And if there's some kind of spring or positive force, then this thing would basically gain a springed front suspension. And I might not do all that to this exact mower, but these are all just kind of thoughts out loud of ideas that I might get to at some point. And the other thought is, if I want to lift this up anymore, I would basically just weld on an extension to the bottom here and put in the control or the locating bolt for the front axle. I put that in a bit lower. So I don't know, that's where I'm at. That is where I think I'm going to cut this off, and I'm going to get down to stripping this some more. So this is the International Harvester Cadet 85 frame update.